What is autism and why is it called a spectrum disorder?
So, autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, and what happens is that the way my brain, if I'm autistic, the way my brain perceives the information, processes it in my brain, and the way I express it all can be very different, okay, from a neurotypical person. And autism does not necessarily impact my ability to learn, okay, but what is different about me as an autistic person will be my style of learning, which is very, very different from how others around me learn or express. When we talk about autism, autism is a very wide spectrum. And so when I say the spectrum, what it means is in different abilities or different ways of communicating, people are impacted differently. So we can have people who are autistic and completely non-verbal. There are also people who are autistic who are leading lives like you and me and have gone through education, have been married, have raising babies, all of that without actually telling anybody or being identified as autistic. So there are people who need a lot of support through their lives, and there are people who also need support but in different ways that are sometimes not very obvious.
What do you mean by neurotypical?
So when we use the word neurotypical, what it really means is the very predefined concept which the majority of people use to measure the developmental standards or pretty much the developmental standards. Very often in school or in little children, these are the academic results that give us an idea. But also my growth, my physical growth, my speech development, the way my brain is functioning in terms of as appropriate to the age. So there are these norms that have been set after a lot of research, and that's considered neurotypical. Neurotypical is what used to be called normal earlier. The world is changing dramatically, and we are embracing neurodiversity, which means the way the brain is processing is very different. And there can be autism and other conditions as well. And neurotypical is when people are not neurodivergent or they're developing typically.
What do you mean by high functioning autism?
So when we think about what was earlier called as high functioning autism or Asperger's earlier, what it really means is that in the early developmental years, so first 5 years of their lives, everything is they're meeting the milestones, everything. They're speaking on time, a lot of them cope very well academically. In fact, they can be excellent students. So we know of autistic people who've been through the IITs and they've been through IIMs and they're lawyers or they're doctors or they're authors working in like really top 5 companies in India, all of that. Because autism is such an invisible condition in the sense that you don't see somebody and immediately get to know that this person may have a condition like autism. Oftentimes, because if I'm autistic and I don't tell you that I have autism, you may not be able to figure out that I have autism. The difference would be in the ways I communicate, or my expression might be very different.
What are the various ways persons on the autism spectrum communicate?
Right. So for a lot of people, whether they're children or adults, a lot of times people may not use spoken language. So they might use, say, a tablet or pictures or type out their responses. They might use an assistive device to support their thoughts. A lot of people might just paint to express themselves, or music can be another form of their expression. But for a lot of autistic people, words might be something that they use. They might be expressing using words. However, expressing their needs, expressing what I want, expressing what is difficult for me, asking for help. I'm stuck in this place. I don't know what else to do. Okay? But asking for help can be very hard. So a lot of autistic people have a lot of struggle in their work. They did fabulously in academics because it was a very structured environment. But our employment places are very socially dependent, right? They're dependent on our social skills. So that makes a lot of difference because I can't chat with you. I can't make the small talk. I can't ask you or gossip about my boss. Those can be things that can be very hard. I'm very focused on my work.
What strategies can be recommended to facilitate communication with persons with autism in different situations?
So one of the things that we do is use a lot of visual cues to teach autistic people, and the good idea is, a good practice would be to continue doing that, because very often we take away the visual cues But for an autistic person, it's like my spectacles, right? It is like, yeah, I need it for a long, long time. It helps me function better. It is like my phone. So one of the things that for most autistic kids, they're visual learners, right? They learn by seeing. So having visual cues for them in their environment, having a very structured, organized environment for them really helps them a long way. So one of our advice always is that continue using that as the child grows and develops. And what we actually do is we also teach children how to create their own visual supports and how to find their way to organize things better. So many times what happens is we feel that, okay, we've taught our child with a lot of visual cues and it's all right to take it away. That is something that we advise against, because for an autistic child, that's really, really important. And that is something that we let the child be with. So all of these strategies that we're talking about are strategies that educators and employers both can be using, and that can be taught to an autistic individual and should be used in the intervention strategies, whether it is at school or whether it is in a clinic. When we think about children, or even for that matter, even adults, there are some things that remain exactly the same. Talk, and these are things that actually neurotypicals or us, they're good for everybody. Talk positive. Don't tell me what I don't want you to do. Tell me what you want me to do. So it's like if I have my hands like this and say, hey Nidhi, don't put your hands here. I don't know what to do. I don't know whether I should keep them here. Should I be doing like this? What do you want me to do? It confuses me, because as an autistic person, I may not even be able to figure out what your really intention is. That's hard for autistic people. So what would be important for me to do is, if you just tell me, Nidhi, can you keep your hand down? That just is a very clear message. That is very important. So tell me what to do versus what not to do. Any kind of subtle, messages, hints, reading between lines. So sometimes we give all of these, sarcasm and jokes are one thing, but sometimes, we're trying to politely, diplomatically tell people, oh yeah, you're looking very nice, but but there is something in my voice, there might be something in my face that is giving away that, yeah, but there is a little thing. For a lot of autistic people, that can be hard to gauge based on your facial expressions, based on the intonation of the voice, to figure out what you actually mean rather than what you say. So if you tell me directly, no politics, no games, just straight, simple messages. That's something that's very helpful. So for a lot of people, when they're in the academic setups, and whether it's school or college, for a lot of them, processing immediately information. So in the sense, the teacher is writing, you're trying to understand, you're trying to write things, all of that together can be very hard. So in a lot of schools, even the ones who are talking about being inclusive, one simple strategy could be if I'm allowed to record the lecture on the phone. That's a very simple strategy that gives me time to go back and process. And that's something that school and college, even as adults in meetings, that I can do. In addition to visual cues, the other thing that really helps is if we can help autistic people plan and prioritize what needs to happen, in which sequence. Visual cues help create that sequence, but sometimes what is also required is making a list, things to do. So if we can teach a lot of those strategies to organize my time better, to organize my how to plan my day, or that can be very, very helpful. Very often schools employ or have shadow teachers for autistic people, and that's again these are some of the things that they can use in their setups.
What co-occurring conditions are often associated with autism?
So intellectual impairment, or what we used to call mental retardation, is one of the most commonly occurring conditions. That is also easily identifiable. But very often we also find some other things that come with it. There are medical conditions like seizures that may happen. We also have ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder. That is something that happens, that co-occurs with autism. Learning disabilities may happen. There is not enough scientific data or research that's going on to give exact figures in India. However, these are conditions that commonly exist. One of the most underdiagnosed conditions as a child as well as an adult is anxiety. So people don't recognize, and including mental health professionals, they don't really recognize how much anxiety a lot of autistic people go through. And that can grow up because of the environment, and especially if I'm growing up in an autism unfriendly environment or not a very supportive environment, it can lead to a lot of mental health conditions as an adult. Depression, anxiety, a lot of times OCDs or obsessive compulsive condition, that is also that also coexists with autism.
What counselling strategies do you suggest when working with adults with autism?
So we get approached by a lot of people actually who are exploring neurodivergence. They felt like an outsider, an imposter all their lives. And what we encourage is, of course, an exploration of their neurodiversity. One of the things that they can do is approach a mental health professional or an educator or a person trained and is neurodiverse affirming. So that's something that really helps because very often when people come to us, they've already been to a lot of professionals who have dismissed that. They've dismissed what is ADHD, there's nothing like that. Or you can't be autistic because if you're coming up for a diagnosis of autism, then you can't have autism. Or autism happens only in children. It can't, you can't be autistic, you're an adult now. So that's a very, very common occurrence, and that can lead to a lot of difficulties for an autistic person because they constantly trivialize. Their experiences are being minimalized, and that's not a great experience. So it can be, seeking support can be a very difficult experience for a lot of adults. Having said that, for if done properly, it can also be a very liberating experience. So I know a lot of times there are, when we give a diagnosis, there are a lot of happy tears and lots of cheers because finally they're being able to embrace their neurodiversity. Somebody's validated their experience. A lot of autistic people, especially the ones who are getting diagnosed as an adult, they need to have continued support as well. Because what to do, how do I negotiate life, how do I negotiate my environment now that I know that I'm neurodiverse? What are the skills I need to build upon? That's something that's very helpful to have.
What is meant by neurodiverse affirming?
There are trainings that are now available which explain what neurodiversity is, and it is embraced as not a bad thing, not something that you need to give away, something that is a strength and nothing to be ashamed of. And that is what we talk about. That's a perspective that we want to talk about, rather than, no, everybody has to fit the same mold.
What are some common misconceptions about autism?
So a lot of times, the traditional understanding of autism is still that, you have to be able to make, if you're autistic, you cannot make eye contact. Okay, for a lot of people, that is true. For a lot of others, they've learned to blend in by mimicking the skills that they see are socially desirable. Okay, so a lot of autistic people have come to their adulthood by embracing people's skills that seem to work for others. Yeah, and so another misconception is that that for autistic people, they can only work in the area of technology, or that they're going to have some savant skills, exceptional skills. So these are very, very common misconceptions. And yes, autistic people are very good and can be very good at some skills, but it's exactly the same as non-autistic people. We all have some skills and then we have some challenges.